I'm 28, and my fiancé Ethan lives in a different state. We take turns visiting each other, but usually I end up making the trip more often. He's got his own place, while I still live with my cousin as a roommate. This time, I was driving up to see him for a week during winter break. I'm a teacher, so I had some time off. I packed a lot. I'd be driving my old beat-up 2010 Ford Focus, which I'd bought secondhand from my cousin. The further north I drove, the more the snow started to pile up. Ethan lives in Maine, and by then, there was already snow on the ground. The deeper I went, the more cautious I had to be. As the weather turned worse, my car wasn't exactly built for icy roads. It was getting late, and the blizzard warnings became impossible to ignore. Ethan and I agreed that I should try to beat the storm, rather than wait until the roads were buried under snow. But as the storm intensified, I started realizing I wasn't going to make it. After stopping for a quick bite and some coffee at a small, out-of-the-way diner, I got into a conversation with the waitress. She warned me I shouldn't be on the roads tonight. She was right. She suggested a few nearby hotels and motels. After she walked away, and I was left alone, a man at the bar swiveled around in his stool and said, "There's a motel just up the road, not far from here." I put the address in my phone. It was only 5 minutes away. "It's cheap too," he added with a grin. "You'll get a quick night's rest, and you can head out first thing in the morning." It was odd. He'd overheard everything. His eyes, too alert. He was just sitting there, nursing a beer. I hadn't realized diners around here even served alcohol. Everything about him felt off. He introduced himself as Ray, but I lied, saying my name was Jessica. The entire time, he kept half-facing me in his seat, turning every now and then. I didn't want to engage with him, so I stared out the window, watching the snow build up, waiting for the waitress to bring my check. As I left, I could feel his eyes on me. By now, at least another inch of snow had piled up. I needed to get to that motel fast. I drove slowly, eventually arriving at the place. Just a simple, run-down motel. A couple of cars were in the lot. It looked cheap, but that was fine. I didn't want to spend much. I checked in, paid about $50, and the man at the front desk handed me a key to one of the ground floor rooms. I went back to my car, grabbed my things, and headed into the room. It was tiny. Tacky wallpaper, a queen-sized bed, and a red, stained carpet. I put my shoes back on and trudged back outside through the snow. On my way to the front desk, I noticed a new car parked in the lot. Someone was sitting inside it. But I didn't pay much attention. Who even notices that sort of thing? The man at the desk didn't say a word, just pointed to the Wi-Fi sign. I hurried back to my room, locked the door, and FaceTimed Ethan. Even with Wi-Fi, the connection was garbage. His voice would cut out. We gave up on FaceTime and decided to just text. At least I was able to tell him I was safe. We were texting for a few minutes when I heard it. A noise coming from the bathroom. I froze. The bathroom door was closed. Was it closed before I couldn't remember? I texted Ethan, telling him what I heard, and that I was freaking out. I hadn't locked the door when I went to the front desk earlier. "Does the door lock by itself?" he asked. I don't think so, but now I wasn't sure if I'd left it open or not. He told me to check the door, and to bring the key with me. I got up slowly and put on my shoes. I walked to the door and noticed that it had an old-fashioned twist lock. When I opened the door to check, my heart stopped cold. There, in the snow, leading up to my room, was a second set of footprints, and they weren't mine. I looked out into the lot, and that new car was not there. Whoever had been in it was gone. I slammed the door shut, ran to the front desk, and told the man working there that someone was in my room. He didn't seem too interested. He told me to wait with him, and made a call. I thought he was calling the police, but no. He was speaking in another language, probably calling a Spanish or something. He hung up and told me again to just sit. I stood where I could see my room from the glass window, and that's when I saw him. The man from the diner, Ray. He was walking out of my room and heading to his car. For a moment, our eyes met before he got in and drove off into the snow. After that, the desk clerk's friend, some big guy who didn't speak English, arrived. I don't know what they were saying, but the front desk worker gave me a new room, free of charge. I didn't feel any safer, but I had no other choice. The next morning, the roads were clear enough to get Ethan's place. Looking back, I'm still angry. The motel worker never called the cops. He didn't want to draw any negative attention to the place. I called the diner later to warn them about that man. After that night, I don't trust strangers anymore. It was late, close to midnight, and the sky was growing darker with each passing minute. I was driving through the quiet countryside of Pennsylvania. My 2 young children in the back seat. Their bickering and fussing pushing me to the edge of my patience. Exhausted, I decided to pull over onto the shoulder of the road, hoping to calm them down. I flicked on the car's hazard lights, stepped out, and opened the back door. "Listen, you two," I said. "You need to stop fighting and be quiet. It's late, and we need to get home safely." As I spoke, I noticed another car pulling up beside us. The window rolled down, revealing a middle-aged couple, both smiling warmly at me. The man leaned out and called, "Hey there, everything okay?" "Yeah, we're fine," I replied, forcing a polite smile. "Just calming the kids down." The woman in the passenger seat gave a sympathetic nod. "There's been an accident just over the next hill," she said. "Traffic's completely blocked. You might want to take the side road a little ways back. It'll get you home quicker." I thanked them for the advice, and they waved as they drove off into the night. I got back into the car, my mind still lingering on what they had told me. I didn't know the area too well, and the thought of taking an unfamiliar side road, especially in the dark, didn't sit well with me. I decided to stay on the main road, even if it meant sitting in traffic for a bit. As I approached the road they had mentioned, I glanced over, and my heart nearly stopped. There, parked on the shoulder of the detour road, was the couple's car, and they were standing outside of it. They weren't moving, just staring into the woods. A shiver ran down my spine. The air around them felt eerie. I shook off the feeling and kept driving. Maybe they had car trouble. Maybe they were lost. But as I crested the hill, I realized something strange. There was no wreck, no traffic, just a clear, empty road stretching out in front of me. Relief washed over me, but a small, nagging thought clung to the back of my mind. What had that couple been doing? Why were they just standing there in the middle of nowhere, staring into the trees? The rest of the drive was quiet. The kids had finally fallen asleep, and I made it home without further incident. But I couldn't stop thinking about them, the couple, their unsettling detour. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. The next morning, I had to drive the same route for some errands. As I neared the detour road, my heart started pounding. I slowed down, peering down the road where the couple had stood. That's when I saw it. A large sign just past where their car had been. Dead end. My thoughts raced. They had been standing there, in the dead of night, in front of a road that led nowhere. Why had they sent me down that way? What were they doing? And how had they disappeared so quickly after speaking to me? Even now, 15 years later, I still think about that night every time. I drive past that detour road. Sometimes when the sun sets and the roads are empty, I see their car again, just past the hill, always in the same spot. But when I look directly, there's nothing there. It's as if they're still out there. I don't know who they were, or what they wanted. But one thing is certain. I'm glad I didn't follow their detour. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. So the next time you're driving alone on a quiet country road, and someone offers you a shortcut, think twice. Sometimes, the long way home is the safest way. I had just finished work at 11 p.m. and was heading back to my house. It's about a 45-minute drive to get home, living several miles outside of the city. The roads were eerily quiet once I started to get further out and closer to home. These drives were usually peaceful, a nice way to wind down after a long day. About 20 minutes away from home, I turned down a long, dimly lit side road that leads directly to my house. This was my usual route, one I'd taken for years without incident. The road was surrounded by dense forest, and at night, it often became engulfed in fog, reducing visibility to just a few feet ahead. Despite its creepiness, it was rare to encounter anyone on this isolated road. As I drove, a small blinking light appeared through the fog ahead, uncertain of its distance or side of the road. The light abruptly vanished as I approached. Suddenly, a weathered car pulled out from the foggy roadside and stopped right in front of me. I tried to brake, but I was too close, and my car tapped the back of theirs. Shocked by the suddenness of it all, I noticed there was little damage to either vehicle. I cautiously opened my door and stood beside my car, waiting for the other driver to emerge. I could see movement inside, but the driver seemed hesitant to come out. Eventually, a middle-aged man emerged slowly. He looked imposing in the dim light. I started off, trying to break the tension. "Is everything okay?" "You pulled out quite suddenly." He appeared uneasy, avoiding eye contact, and replied after a pause, "Yeah, sorry." His strange demeanor made me uncomfortable. Standing alone on this desolate road, I informed him there was no significant damage, and that I planned to continue home. As I reached for my car door, he abruptly requested to check his car for damage before I left. I reluctantly agreed, standing by as he inspected his car. His behavior grew odder as he circled his vehicle, scrutinizing it as if expecting more damage than my minor tap warranted. When he moved towards the passenger side, a large figure stirred in the back seat, moving towards the door. Instinctively, I retreated into my car and locked the doors. A second man emerged from the back, both waving their hands frantically at me, urging me to stop. Panic surged as I swiftly put the car in drive and sped away down the road, glancing in my rearview mirror. Their headlights flickered through the dissipating fog. For about 30 seconds, I could see them behind me, but soon their lights faded into the night. I pulled into a nearby gas station, 5 minutes from home, and waited, watching for any sign they might follow. After 15 agonizing minutes, no car passed by. Relieved yet unsettled, I eventually continued home. At the time, unsure if I was overreacting, I chose not to call the police. Reflecting on it now, every aspect of that encounter feels deeply unsettling. I can't shake the feeling that something dangerous was about to happen. If I hadn't acted quickly, part of me regrets not reporting it, wondering if they've targeted others since that night. I was driving through Montague County, Texas one night to avoid traffic getting home. It was probably a little past midnight at this point, and the road was eerily deserted, just the way I prefer it. I was listening to my usual podcast on the radio when a ding came from my car, alerting me that I was low on fuel. I put a pit stop into my Maps app for the nearest gas station, which was a bit up the secluded road. About 5 minutes later, I pulled into the gas station on the right, the only parking lot for miles, as this road was nothing but woods on each side. The gas station was some generic, no-name place. I pulled next to the pump and noticed a man filling up the tank of his old beater pickup truck. He glanced at me as I walked past him and into the shop. Inside the shop, I bought a coffee and paid cash for my gas. When I came back outside, I noticed the man at the pump getting into his pickup truck and then driving away. After a couple of minutes of filling up the tank, I got back in my car and continued my drive. But not even a minute after leaving the station, I noticed on the side of the road, on the grass, That same pickup truck from the gas station. It was just sitting next to the woods, turned off. I kept driving, looking in my rearview mirror to see if it would turn on. Nope. I turned my podcast back on and continued my drive. A few minutes passed, though, and I heard another ding from my car. My dashboard screen showed that one of my tires was very low. I slowed down and started hearing a wobbling sound. I opened a window and knew right away I had a flat tire. I pulled to the side of the road and went to investigate. It was my rear driver's side tire. It was flat. I didn't think I hit anything. I would have felt it. The thought came to my head. What if that guy at the gas station slashed it? I took out my phone and looked up the number for my roadside assistance company on Google. I heard the sound of a car or truck engine a little down the road behind me. But oddly, I didn't see any headlights. It was just pitch black down there. Then, the sound of the engine suddenly stopped, and it was quiet again. I went to my trunk to grab the SOS flashlight out of my toolbox, which my dad had given me one year as a Christmas present. I grabbed the long light rod, turned it on, and aimed it down the road. I saw the reflection of a truck's headlights. Pulled on the side of the road about 200 feet away. It looked like that pickup truck again. I gasped and ran into the woods, ducking behind a big bush and tree. I took out my phone and called 911. I heard the sound of the truck down the road starting, and this time the headlights were on. I heard and saw through the bush the truck pull up next to my car. And then, after a short moment of silence, a man yelled out, "You need some help." I knew better than to answer. 911 picked up, and I whispered into the phone my location, and that someone slashed my tire, and that I think the person who did it was right here, following me. The lady asked a bunch of standard questions, asking me to describe the man in his truck. I heard the truck door open and close. I told the lady over the phone that the man got out of his truck. She told me to remain hidden in the woods, if I thought he was a threat. She asked if I could see if he was armed, and that's when the call disconnected. I had shitty cell reception there. I waited, hoping she would call me back. I'm sure she was trying to, but it wouldn't go through. I heard the sound of another passing car on the road. It was slowing down. Then, I heard talking. It was the voice of another man. I crept closer to the edge of the woods to get a view of the road. I saw the man from the pickup truck, standing next to this other stocked pickup truck. In the middle of the road, he was talking to a person in the truck. I overheard the creepy man coming up with this fake explanation as to what was going on here. At that moment, I rushed into the road yelling, "Help, I don't know him." Both the man in the truck and the man who followed me looked over at me. I said to the men in the truck that this man slashed my tire and followed me here. The man in the truck's reaction was to look at the man with a disturbed look. The creepy man denied having done anything to my tires and claimed he's never seen me before. At the same time, he hurried away to his pickup truck and started backing up until he cleared both of our vehicles, then drove off. The man in the other pickup truck got out and examined my flat, then offered me a ride into town. I told him I had police officers on the way. And sure enough, within a few minutes, a cop car with its lights on pulled up beside us. The man vouched for me when I told him about the other man. The police officer said he'd go down to the gas station and request to see the camera footage to see if it caught the pickup driver actually slashing my tire. The officer took my info, and he waited with me while I waited for the roadside assistance company. The tow truck driver gave me a ride to a shop where my dad picked me up. I never heard from that police officer, so I guess he didn't see anything in that video footage. It's scary how close I was to probably being abducted, though. I live in a small town in northern Montana. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other, and not much ever happens. When I was 21, my boyfriend Henry, along with our two friends Laura and Steve, decided to go for a late-night drive. We were bored, looking for something to do. Something to get our hearts racing. It was a warm summer night, and we drove around aimlessly for what felt like hours. just talking, laughing. Then, around midnight, Henry had this bright idea. "Let's go to the old cemetery," he suggested. It was on the outskirts of town, hadn't been used since the late 1800s. It was notorious for how eerie it felt, especially at night. We all thought it was a great idea at the time, but little did we know how much we'd regret it. We took a narrow, forgotten back road, the kind of road you wouldn't even know existed unless someone told you about it. The trees on either side were tall, looming, closing in like they were trying to swallow us whole. The only light came from the car's headlights, casting long shadows that danced in the corners of my eyes. The further we went, the quieter it became. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just the gravel crunching under the tires. It was around 2:45 a.m. when we finally pulled up to the cemetery. The gate was rusted, barely hanging on by its hinges, creaking slightly in the wind. Henry cut the engine, and we stepped out. The cool air sent a shiver through me, and as if on cue, a light fog began rolling in. The place felt wrong. The silence was deafening. The only sound, the faint hoot of an owl in the distance. We'd barely taken a few steps into the cemetery when Laura stopped. "Wait, what's that?" she whispered, pointing to the far end of the graveyard. We all squinted, straining our eyes to see. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but then I saw it too. 4 white-hooded figures, slowly circling a grave. They moved with a deliberate, ritual-like precision. My heart began pounding. "We should leave," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. But no one moved. We were frozen, staring, caught in the horror of it all. Even Henry, who always played it cool, looked terrified. "Yeah, let's get out of here," he finally muttered, his voice shaky. We turned on our heels and bolted back to the car. Henry fumbled with the keys, his hands trembling. The moment the engine roared to life, he floored it, the tires kicking up gravel as we sped away from the cemetery, from those hooded figures. The drive back was deathly silent. None of us spoke. We were all too shaken, too disturbed by what we had just witnessed. When we finally made it back to town, Henry parked, and we just sat there, staring ahead, trying to process what had happened. "What do you think they were doing?" Laura finally broke the silence, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Steve replied, his voice almost as shaky. "And honestly, I don't want to know." We all agreed. Whatever it was, something we didn't want to understand. We promised each other, right there in the car, that we would never go back, never speak of it again. But the memory has stayed with me. Every time I drive past that old back road, I can't help but wonder who those hooded figures were, and what they were doing in that forsaken cemetery at nearly 3 a.m.